This is Matthew of Another World Terraria, where I teach and inspire you on the topics of rare plants and artistic nature displays. In my previous video, I unboxed some jungle plants from Buceplant.com. In this video, I'm going to show you how I set up and planted the grow bins and summarize the basic care that I plan to provide for those plants. Note that there are links in the description to many of the supplies shown in this video. Let's get started. For the biggest jungle plant from the Buceplant order, I'm going to use the largest bin that I have available and can fit in my plant room. This one already has ventilation set up, which you can learn about in my grow bin tutorial series. For the rest of the smaller plants in the group, I'll be using this medium-sized bin. In this case, I decided to make an experimental, custom dirty sphagnum substrate mix. Dirty sphagnum is just sphagnum with some potting soil mixed in, but I wanted to make this batch with a lot of different ingredients for improved aeration, drainage, pH, and other attributes. Sphagnum moss is a great acidic substrate base for a lot of tropical plants. It's fluffy and moist, which promotes good root growth and helps keep moisture-loving plants hydrated. I soak the moss in distilled water until it's saturated, and then I firmly squeeze out as much water as I can so that it's fluffy and slightly moist. Now that I've put the desired amount of sphagnum in this large bin, let's take a look at the other substrate ingredients. Pinus radiata bark is an acidic substrate. Just a couple of its many benefits are that it contains beneficial microorganisms and is quite long-lasting. Monto clay is a calcined clay, which means it is fired at high temperatures to harden it. It has an acidic pH, increases friability, and can improve a substrate mix's nutrient retention. Lately, I've been adjusting my substrate mixes to be freer draining and more airy. Perlite is excellent for this, but for the best results, I recommend spending more to get a better quality, more coarse grade. Perlite has a neutral pH. Happy Frog is an outstanding potting soil which has beneficial microbes and fungi and lots of other great ingredients and nutrients. In this case, I'm mixing willow oak leaf litter into the substrate, which will slowly release nutrients as they decompose. They'll also temporarily improve aeration and promote microfauna colonies to flourish. Whenever I plant things, regardless of whether it's in a grow bin or a pot or anything else, I customize the substrate to the needs of the plants in question. I'm adding all of those substrate ingredients onto the initial sphagnum base without measuring them. I'm just guessing what I think will work well for these plants, partially based on a bit of research and partially based on my gut instincts and experience with plants over the years. Next, I thoroughly mix everything together, ensuring all of the substrate ingredients are equally distributed. Then I level everything out in the bin. For more instructions and tips for grow bins, check out my detailed tutorial series linked in the description and the video info cards. Thanks again to the Buceplant team for generously sharing the beautiful plants featured in this video, including this huge Labisia species turtleback. After unboxing, I misted the leaves and let the plant sit in water for a couple of hours to help it rehydrate. When ready to plant, I dig a space out for the roots and insert the plant in. In this case, since the plant is large and has a wide leaf span, I'm positioning it in the middle of the bin to give it as much space as possible. At the moment, the leaves on this specimen are positioned to the side a bit. I'm making an assumption that some of the leaves will probably reorient themselves over time toward the light. I pack some sphagnum under the stem as needed to help position the plant at the angle that I want. I'm going to plant the other species in a separate container, so I still have a bit of free space around the turtleback plant. I'm adding a variety of rare miniature plants and moss and liverworts, which will eventually create a ground cover under the main specimen. I do this to increase my stock of small rare plants, favorite plants, and moss which I can eventually use for terrariums. Something very important to note is that I put all new plants through a quarantine period, regardless of who I got them from or how healthy they look. Any other plants that I add into the bin are effectively now entering the same quarantine and are at the same risk if a pest or disease were to come up. For that reason, I would never put any one-of-a-kind plants or anything else that I wouldn't be willing to let go of should an issue arise that I can't remedy. By the way, there are links in the description to all of these beautiful plants on the Buceplant website. There's still more to do on the large bin we've planted, but first I want to plant up the smaller bin. Here are the plants we'll be using, stored in distilled water to rehydrate them, as I mentioned in the unboxing video. I used the same substrate for the small bin as I did for the large one. There will be 4 jungle plants in this bin. When planting, I make sure to leave enough space around each plant from the edge of the bin and the other plants. As before, I dig a hole so that I can place the plant's stem or roots into the substrate, position the plant, then fill the hole back in, and adjust the position with more sphagnum padding as needed. One of these smaller plants also has foliage to the side like the Labisia turtleback did, but given time the leaves should reorient toward the light. When planting smaller cuttings and those with no roots, I firmly wrap the end with sphagnum and then insert the bundled stem into the main substrate layer. Then I gently firm the substrate down around the cutting. This helps ensure better contact of the substrate on the stem, which will support hydration and root development. Then I give one more round of firming down the substrate around all of the cuttings and place a few pieces of sphagnum over some of the exposed stems. Now I'm adding more small plants, moss, and liverworts into the empty space between the primary specimens. Next, I'll add Microfauna, which are often called cleanup crew because they eat decaying matter and maintain a healthier environment for the plants. I prefer to diversify the ecosystem by using a combination of both springtails and isopods. Here I'm adding springtails, which I culture in deli containers. And here I'm adding dwarf white isopods, which I culture in plastic shoe boxes. For more info on microfauna, such as how to culture springtails and dwarf white isopods, check out my videos on those topics. I highly recommend that you label your plants and bins, and I find that it's best to label them right away so I don't get behind on it. I use one label to note the date that the substrate was first set up or last refreshed, which helps me keep track of how old it is and when it needs maintenance. And then I use more labels as needed to note the plant IDs, origins, sources, and dates obtained. Date obtained is extremely important because I can keep track of the quarantine period and other time-based data. I'll be growing these plants on the typical wire rack setup using the under-cabinet LED strips that I use for the majority of my collection. I'm going to keep these plants at a relatively low light level because most or all of them likely grow in shaded forests where the light isn't very bright. Additionally, especially in the beginning, I don't want to shock them or promote too much foliage growth during the acclimation period while they are adjusting to the new conditions and trying to build root systems. For those reasons, I'm going to keep a bit of shade cloth over the bin to soften the light. For more detailed info about the main types of plant lights I use, check out my lighting video. These plants prefer high humidity, so I've adjusted the ventilation amount on the bins by partially covering the vents with duct tape. Tape is a great way to adjust ventilation on bins which already have holes or vents, since you can position it at any level to fine-tune the humidity and airflow. As with all of my plants, I'll be watering with distilled water, which is very pure and doesn't have minerals or chemicals which can harm sensitive plants over time in an enclosed space. Since the bins are very humid and almost completely sealed and the substrate is moist, I'll most likely not need to water the plants very often. I water and mist plants per whatever the particular species prefer, and I do so by keeping tabs on the substrate moisture levels. I'm betting these plants come from an environment which is probably not very dense in nutrients, which is also the case for many of the other tropical plants that I grow. For that reason, I won't be fertilizing these jungle plants until I see signs that they might be hungry. The substrate mix I use has plenty of nutrients to start with. At some point in the future, when there is significant growth progress with these plants, I'll be making an update video. Assuming these do well, that's a video you won't want to miss. If you enjoy my videos, please consider giving them a like, and join Team Terraria by subscribing now. Remember to click the bell so you'll get notified when I post new content.